Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm honored to bring you Witchcraft and Theurgy with the one, the only Brandy Williams. Greeting, Brandy. How are you today?
I'm great, Hercules. Thank you so much again for producing this show. It's great.
And I'm looking forward to listening to every single word. If you need me, just holler. Hi, Megan, Dr. Megan Rose.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here.
And I'm thrilled that you are here.
All right. And I want to let our viewers know that Dr. Megan Rose is the author of Spirit Marriage. And I'm looking for that subtitle.
Intimate relationships with otherworldly beings.
That's the one. And it's just a marvelous book. It's great work. So I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I want to do the things we usually talk about, and also to talk about the new work that you're doing, because I think that it fits right in with the theme of the show. And I'm always excited to hear what you're doing. So as usual, I have two questions that I ask people. What is witchcraft and what is theurgy? So I will start with that first one. What is witchcraft to you? How do you understand witchcraft?
Yeah, I mean, I think about like witchcraft through the ages, right? And how it's meant, it's very different things in very different cultures and very different times in history, right? But at its core, and how I practice witchcraft is is through the lens of animism, right? Through the lens of the animist worldview, which sees everything around us, right, is alive and has consciousness at varying levels of development and various stratas of being. And to me, witchcraft is riding the wave, or riding the tides of co-creative collaboration, right, with the planet that we live on, and which includes sort of the cosmos that we are nested within. And so to me, a witch is one who weaves themselves into the fabric of creation by having a conscious and sometimes very deeply devoted relationship to all strata of being, and from that shapes the world around him, her, them, consciously shaping, consciously co-creating.
Oh, that's marvelous. Do you have you said, witchcraft, what witchcraft is to you? Do you have a practice that you like to share with people?
A lot of my witchy work is very kind of what I would classify as kind of Southern conjure work, meaning it is very WYSIWYG. It's very like, work with what you have, use the very it is not although I am a ceremonial magician, my witchcraft practice is very homespun. It's very like, what are the things I have around the house, and what are the things that when I'm doing a working, that my spirits, a lot of times I like to, in this idea of co-creation, right, I like to show up. I sort of show up for the scheduled date, and then we just sort of jazz. We sort of see what wants to come out of it, and I have a general sense of where I want to go, or what the intention is that I'm setting. But a lot of times it's almost, and this is sort of ranging into theurgy, it's almost like my mundane Megan consciousness takes a little step back, and the spirit will move through me and use my body to work whatever I'm spinning or creating or manifesting. So I am not a formal witch in, say, an Alexandrian, Gardnerian, etc. kind of practice. I am very much I guess maybe you'd call me an intuitive witch, or a spirit worker is maybe a little more of an apt phrase, that I co-create through that conversation of sorts that I have with the whatever the energy is that I'm working with: water, ocean, redwood, earth, whatever.
My coven met today and did our fall equinox ritual. It was a little late this year. And we all looked at each other and said, oh, I'm so glad that we got a chance to get together and turn the wheel, because we really feel that we need to do that to reconnect ourselves with what the energies are that are going on around us. And we also feel a responsibility as witches to co-create, to help participate in that process and make sure that the energies are moving as they should. And one of the things I always say is that I ask the weather to fall into a stable pattern. I used to say into its accustomed patterns, but it's really too chaotic at this point. So I just say a stable pattern that can sustain our ecosystem. So that's kind of how I approach it. Have you done anything for fall equinox this year, or any kind of syncing up there?
My fall equinox has looked like getting my house sort of in order, my sort of physical but also spiritual house kind of in order as the things are turning, you know, and we're heading into fall. I did definitely have done some intention settings. I'm in the middle of a really large alchemical working with my students right now. We're doing a 7-month alchemical deep dive through 7 different phases in the alchemical process. And so my fall equinox looked a lot like mirroring what phase of alchemy we're in right now. Yeah.
I may come back to that because that sounds so fascinating. But I want to get to my second question, because you've already started talking about it. So you're a ceremonial magician, and you kind of know some of the formal definitions of theurgy, but it always surprises me when I ask this question, how personal that question can be. So can you talk to me about what theurgy is to you, how you understand it?
Yeah, I think I primarily come at theurgy through 2 different streams. One, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but one is my Pentecostal upbringing and being filled and indwelled with the Holy Spirit, right? From birth, practically. I mean, I talk about this in my book, where I was less than a year old and the Holy Spirit was prayed into my body, which, you know, I understand now to be the divine feminine, right? This goddess energy, or the fiery sort of fierce goddess energy that wisdom Sophia is another way that I sort of grok her. And so I think that when you're raised in a tradition that you know, and the Pentecostals would kill me for saying this, but when you're raised in a tradition that encourages that level of channeling, and this is, you know, something that didn't just happen once. This was every Sunday, twice a day, and often on Wednesdays as well, that I was steeping in that level of embodiment or invocational kind of energy. When you're raised like that, the divine is sometimes just a breath away. And it's just this sort of like centering and stilling and like feeling into and making space. And so from very early on, I was in essence trained how to make space for the divine in my body, this sort of theurgic practice of aspecting, sometimes called aspecting. And then the other lens that I have come at this has been in my Shakta tantric practice, which I know, you know, we share some of those practices in common. And that has been these deeply devotional, intimate relationship. And, you know, when I say intimate relationship, like the subtitle of my book, I'm not talking necessarily about sexuality, although that can play into it, right? It's more about this indwelled, right, where the deity, that we are a fractal of the constellation of their larger being, arises out of us. And I talk about this in my book when I talk about what I call what I talk about when I talk about theurgy. I use the term entheosis. In theos, right, meaning the divine within, and in the art and the practice of awakening the divine within. And so it can be a I thou relationship, right, with here I am. And you know, you may have gone through this in your tantric practice, where you start with the deity out there, right, and you have the murti, and you start with the devotional, that level of devotion, but ultimately it draws he, she, it draws closer and closer and closer until the deity is arising inside of you as you, in auspicious circumstances, and maybe, you know, as sort of how we show up increasingly in the world, if we're, you know, able to be in that level of service and surrender and co-creation. But yeah, so theurgy for me is really about this entheotic practice of dialogue, communion, and ultimately deep union with the divine.
Yeah, and the Shakta tantric practices are so good at that, are so good at getting us to connect with that and to understand the divine as that. And I love it. You've talked to me about that before, about the divine coming out from us. I think in the Western traditions, like the Golden Dawn tradition, we think about the divine as settling on us or even in us. But the Shakta tantric practice finds the divine in us and then brings that out. And so it's a whole different level of intimacy with the divine, which I just adore. So talk to me some more about entheosis. I know that you have ambition to do another work. You're moving forward with your work. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I just want to make a little drop before we go there. Yeah. And that is this idea about in and out, up and down, out and in, whatever. I think what I suspect, Brandy, is that these deities, right, are not as spatially restricted and they don't orient spatially like we do. Like we think is in the human physical body, right? We have timelines and we have a birth date and a death date, and then, you know, our spirit goes on and does other things. But when we're talking about these numinous practices, I don't think that, and it's similar to Gaia theory, right? We are nested in the body of Gaia. We are part of the body of Gaia already. So, is she coming out of us? Are we sitting back into her? Is she greater than us? Are we still a part of her? I think the answer is yes. And I think that this idea of theurgy, we can get hung up a little bit on the mechanics of it. And certainly if there are practices and protocols that you're doing that are part of a lineage, that specificity can be very important. But, you know, it's not just the Shakta tantrics, right? In my research, I talked to a few different practitioners, theurgic practitioners or entheotic practitioners. And in the Vodou tradition, right, coming out of New Orleans and Haiti, they talk about being ridden by the spirits, right, when the Loa will aspect through you. But the Mambo that I talked to, Bloody Mary, said, you know, when you're ridden by a spirit, there's this idea that it rides you and it comes out through you, but you could also just as accurately say it's already inside of you and it comes outside of you. And so it comes out of you. And so I think that there's room for both in our understanding of how the mechanics of this might work. And I think it's useful to think of it through both lenses, right? Because certainly the inside, nested inside of you, dormant inside or nascent, the seed inside of you, the entelechy, Aristotle would say, coming out, is a very useful way of Jung would call it individuation, right? It's a very useful way of thinking of like, oh, this is inside of me and it's inside of every single person. Everybody has a divine self that's trying to burst out of their core consciousness, right? Their core self. And I think that makes relationships, right, with other humans much more interesting when you're like, wonder what divine being, right? And actually, when I interviewed the ceremonial magician Frater Lux, he also alluded to this idea that the divine self, you know, he talked about the mundane self and then the higher self and the divine self and how it sits above, but like above is also kind of a misnomer. And I think a lot about the tantric the mantra, or excuse me, the yantra, right? Where you've got the bindu. It's like we are our, and these yantras are the body of the deity, but they're also our cosmology, our cosmogony as well, our sacred body. It's like the bindu at the very center is the deity, and then we're one of those many manifestations, or we can be. So that was a long aside, but the entheosis piece is sort of coming out of my spirit marriage research, where originally I thought, spirit marriage, I thought of spirit marriage as this I thou thing, that I'm marrying this spirit separate from me, that I might not have anything in common with. It might be, completely new. In my case, it was this completely new deity that I didn't know very much about at all, that was wooing me, and that I had to, go through a number of years of learning about them. And it was very much a kind of my polar opposite in a lot of ways. And Bloody Mary, the voodoo mambo, also talked about how sometimes in a spirit marriage or union, you will be seasoned, right? A marriage is sort of like seasoning, or what they call the mariage loa. Whereas the matet, the deity that is your patron loa, or patron saint, or patron deity, is sort of like who you are here to be a flavor and expression of. But it's not a hard and fast thing, because the Shakta tantric that I interviewed, Kama Devi, her Ishta Devi is Kali, and her spirit wife is Kali, and it's the same deity. So I think that, entheosis was this sort of natural, what's going on there? That I got really interested in as a sort of side quest from the spirit marriage, which I was thinking was the I thou relationship, and or the the externalized deity, and then the entheosis is sort of like the internalized deity. And so that's what I'm researching now, and that's what I'm looking at putting another book together on. Like I did with spirit marriage, where I looked at different traditions around the world. I'm planning to do that with entheosis, the entheosis book. Although in that case, because it's not a PhD dissertation, which was what the other book was, in this case, I really want to invite writers from within their tradition to contribute, so that they're speaking from their own tradition. I did interviews in the other one, so I got as close to getting the word from the horse's mouth as possible that you can do kind of in a academic research setting. But entheosis, I think, will be a collaborative effort with hopefully a bunch of different writers.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that you're really good at encouraging collaboration, and it's a real fundamental part of your work.
Yeah, it really is, because I don't hold all the answers. There
may be a part of us that does. So how do you envision going? Have you started that now? You said you were doing a class, so we could talk about that, but would you rather talk about that, or talk about how you're going to go about working on the next book?
Well, the next book, I have my outline, and I've been starting to reach out to different authors that that write on this subject, and or that are in traditions that I know that practice this. And like everything else with me, I am not a crank out a book every year kind of writer. It took me 10 years to work on my PhD dissertation, and 6 of those were writing and researching the dissertation. So I'm a very turtle not hare when it comes to working on books. Partly because that I'm an academic, and so I research things pretty exhaustively. And I'm also teaching. I teach for Cherry Hill Seminary. I'm on faculty with them. And so, between my my mundane job and my teaching and my one-on-one practice and group practice, I have to find out how to fit in writing on top of all the rest of that. So I have my outline, I have my idea of where I'm going, and my plan is to sit down and write probably the introductory chapter so that I can send that out to different folks and hopefully get some interest in contributors. So if for anyone who's listening to this, you know, if you are interested and you have, first of all, any transcultural examples of spirit marriage. I talked about the Shakta Tantric. I talked about the Vodou tradition, not spirit marriage, excuse me, entheosis or theurgy. So I talked about the Shakta Tantric. I talked about the Vodou. We talked about the pagan and Hellenic tradition. If you have other examples in other traditions, please, you know, reach out to me and let me know so that I can add those to my list. And also, if you're interested in contributing, reach out and let me know.
Yes, Hercules brings together several Llewellyn writers in a living theurgy discussion on the third Fridays of the month, and then he posts it after we talk to each other. And that certainly is a group of people who might be interested in talking. I don't know if you know Cleo Ajana. I'll get you in contact with her. She's a practitioner of a number of traditions and has an interesting perspective. So I'd recommend her for sure.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, I really, my idea is that we look at theurgy and divine embodiment practices from a variety of different traditions and perspectives to get a more fuller, like I said, transcultural understanding of how it's done, to what ends, you know, what are the purposes, because not all traditions are aspecting the divine for the same reasons and in the same ways, and so that we can see the similarities and the differences, and just, you know, have a more broader understanding and toolkit to draw from.
That's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to it since the first time you talked to me about it. So I'll be your cheering section. Go, Megan.
Thank you.
So you had talked about doing an alchemy. The alchemy class, is that with Cherry Hill, or is that a personal class that you're running?
I have a group deepening program. So these are folks who have spirit marriages and are wanting a safe, grounded, sort of carefully curated container to talk about and share their spirit marriage experiences, because, you know, spirit marriage is still considered to be kind of a little edgy, transgressive, or, you know, just kind of out there and strange. And so folks that are having these experiences, which, by the way, since my book came out, I think on almost a weekly, you know, for a while there, it was like on a daily basis, I would have people reaching out to me going, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one having these experiences and I wasn't really sure what to do about it. And then I found your book and it is like so validating. So so I wanted to create a safe space for people to come and talk to other people and share their stories and share their experiences. And so I have an ongoing program that's open. People can come and join at any time. And it is, you know, we meet twice a month, once to receive teaching. So I give out a teaching every month. And then the second one is a coaching group where we all come together and share our stories and ask questions. And I do, you know, sort of spotlight coaching with folks. So that group has been going on for almost 2 years now. And we just started a 7-month working together as a group where we're going through the 7 stages of alchemical transformation as the Rosicrucians, you know, because that there's a whole bunch of different processes, alchemical processes, and some, you know, you don't necessarily have to do 7 stages, but So we're following this sort of Rosicrucian model and going through these phases one a month. And we started with our with kind of, and I take a very depth psychology approach to this. So we sort of went into our unconscious to find our prima materia and draw it up to the surface. And then we sat with that for about a month to sort of really taste into and get refinement around what is this prima materia that we're working with. And then we began taking it first through the calcinadio phase, which is taking it into fire. And so we're using a lot of guided visualization, but then I also have them externalize it by, if they want to, they don't have to, but externalize it by creating an alchemical representational object that could be a puppet, it could be a painting, it could be a rock, whatever they feel drawn to use as their externalization of this alchemical process. And then they take that through the alchemy phases as well. So some candle magic, some water magic, some earth magic, you know, we're sort of weaving in those elemental witchy skills into the alchemical working.
So what process are you in now? How far have you gotten?
We're in Solutio, so we're only in the second of the Negredo, the blackening phase. So we did Calcinadio, and now we're in Solutio. And so we'll be in Solutio now until the second week of October, when we move into the next phase. And really the heart of this is how we are sort of using this time to both connect to the energy of transformation and also the quality of bringing those qualities, right? So we were bringing more fire into our life during the Calcinadio phase, and now we're bringing more water and listening, right? Listening for the synchronicity, right? Listening for the ways in which those processes are calling to us and alive inside of us, even when we're not consciously doing a working around it. And we're using a lot of the lunar energy as well. So like the full moon is when we do our externalization rituals, sort of lighting up the working with the full moon. So yeah, so we move from dissolution, calcination, dissolution, separatio or separation. That's the third phase that we'll be moving into in October. That's air. And then conjunction, which is the earth phase, will be November. Fermentation, which is working with 3 essentials, that's in December. Distillation, and then we'll finish with coagulation.
That sounds like a book too.
Yeah, it's interesting because that when I started my group program, it was very focused on here are the skills that I think someone needs as they are cultivating a devoted relationship, a devoted, intimate relationship with their spirit beloved. And there are theurgic aspects to that, but not everybody is in an intimate relationship with a deity, right? I have people that are married to beloved dead, people that are married to elementals. It kind of runs the gamut. And so, I've tried to make it as open and as broad. And that's really the heart of my practice and my teaching, is to capture or to offer to all the people that don't fall into one particular set tradition, give them a place to be embraced, right? And give them a place where they can still come and cultivate but they're not having to initiate into like a particular house or a particular lineage. I certainly bring all of the lineages that I carry, and those inform what I teach. But as a comparative religion scholar, what I've really tried to do is look at what is the spiritual technology going on here underneath this ritual or this liturgy or this practice. What's it doing on the somato-emotional body? And how then can we use not necessarily that specific ritual, right? Because that's specific to a lineage. So I'm not like cherry picking from all these different lineages. But how do we understand what the root of what's going on? So I'll give you an example. In tantric practice, we have the working with a yantra, right? And the yantra represents the body of the divine, as I said earlier. It's literally, you know, it's activated, and that is the deity. And so that's wonderful. And if you're working with this tantric deity that you have a yantra for, fantastic. You already have, you know, the cliff notes. But if you're working with a beloved dead, so for example, I'll use the example of one of my co-researchers from my book is married to, he's a Ungan, a Vodou priest, and he's married to two of the Hercules, Freda and Dantor, which in the Vodou tradition, they have what are called veves, and they're these drawings. And that's a kind of akin to a mandala, because that is the image or the cosmogram that represents the deity. But he's also married to Maya Deren, who was a documentary filmmaker and who's passed. And so he's married to this beloved dead. And so what I've encouraged my students to do when they have a kind of outside of the box spirit marriage, where there isn't a lot of formularies or liturgies or yantras or whatever for them, is to find, you know, they can either create a sigil, right? This gets into sigil work. They can create a sigil for that spirit, for that deity, or they can find, for example, you know, I'm thinking of a student who's in a relationship with Mary Magdalene. I myself have a deep devotional relationship to Mary Magdalene. I'm not married to her, but when I work with Mary Magdalene, I use the Vesica Piscis and a specific version of it, right, from the Chalice Well in Glastonbury, and that becomes a kind of sigil or cosmogram for her energy. And so so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this technology. And in theurgic practice, right, it's similar to the Morty work, right, where you're pulling into the statue, right, you're pulling into the image, right, the spirit, the soul, you're opening the eyes, the mouth. That's done with a Vodou puppets, where you create a puppet and then you open the mouth so that it can speak. It's used in tantric practice. I mean, it's it's used in the West African Dagara tradition, where you create these images made out of like ash and mud that are for specific spirits, and you give them eyes and mouths, and like they become the sort of proxy house. They're, you know, essentially we're talking about spirit houses, right? These houses for the spirit. And so these are transcultural, cross-cultural technologies that we see all over the place. And how do we make that work for people who sit outside of one of these very specific lineages? And how do, you know, how do I know enough as a mentor and a teacher to give people sort of the general building blocks, and then to point them in maybe an initiatory path, right? When it's time for them to go deep in one path or another.
Oh, that's astonishing work. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the Kemetic, the first place I learned about putting deity in statues of the house was in Kemetic work, but of course it's also in the Neoplatonic theurgy, straight up theurgy. That's one of the places that you can put deity. And then the Kemetic stuff is very formal. The temples can be very formal. So I thought about that, and it was very interesting when you said that's in West Africa, because I didn't know that there's that whole technology around opening the mouth and opening the eyes, and tools that do that in the Kemetic tradition that I'm sure must connect up to the West African tradition. I think there are some very solid roots there. So that was interesting. But as you were talking too, you were saying you're talking about people who are outside of a specific tradition, but also that kind of points to people like me and like you who have more than one tradition and see all the connectors, right? Like there's you've several times said you see this in this tradition, in this tradition, in this tradition, in this tradition, and so there's a whole set of things around how we talk about each tradition and honor it, and then also see the connections elsewhere and try not to be like too appropriative, like, oh, I know how I can use that, but to honor that in its system, but also to figure out the connection. So I know that some of your work goes there, and is that kind of where you're going with your students as well?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we not take the practice a sort of a lineage-based spiritual technology that's housed within a specific cultural context, right? And then just like cherry pick things off of it and throw, spaghetti at the wall and see what works, right? We need to understand that these practices work within the lineage, the cosmology, the tradition, right? That's a whole ecosystem. Right. So it's kind of like, this is an interesting example. It's like about 100 years ago in San Francisco, here where I live, somebody was like, we need to put windbreaks against all these winds that we're getting off the ocean. So let's plant up these eucalyptus trees because they grow really, really fast. And now, like 100 years later, all the eucalyptus, because it's an invasive species that's not native to San Francisco, is like taking over our parks. And they've been having to go in and like rip out all these eucalyptus trees because it's just sort of like choking everything else out. So, I think of it a little bit like, you have to be very, very mindful of what you plant and where, and really know what you're doing. And so, when I look at something like, and not all, so, I'm saying, okay, well, this is, I see it here, I see it here, I see it here, I see it here. That doesn't mean that it's exactly the same or to the same purpose or to the same outcome in each of these traditions. What I see that is the commonality is the idea that a spirit can come into an object and you can have a relationship with that. And that's sort of where I start with a lot of, you can have a relationship with a spirit, and what amplifies that relationship with a spirit is having some sort of liturgy, some sort of written poem or song or hymn or recitation that you do on a daily basis to build up that relationship, right? These are like really, really stripped down. I don't want to say dumbed down, but it's like stripped down to the technology, right, of what's going on here that helps us build our devotion, that helps build our discernment, that helps build our discipline, right? Those are my big three, the 3Ds of my practice: discernment, discipline, and devotion. And that's really, devotional practices look like lots of different things around the world, and from person to person, right? Like how I do devotion may not be how you do it, even though we both sit within a Shakta framework. And so, but knowing that devotion is really important, right? And that devotion is something that kind of comes from the heart. It's love centered, right? There's a surrender, can get us really far. Same thing with, the discernment practices, right? Discernment, how I do discernment, right? Whether I read tarot or whether I scry or whatever, that's going to look different. But there are discernment practices, by and large, throughout many, 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 if not all, major world religions and spiritualities.
Yes. Yeah, and I think about the theurgic tradition, the Western, in the Western magical tradition, and we're really working to recreate that. So it was something that was broken from the past. We don't have a lineage that brings it forward into the future. So as we theurgists today work to bring those practices back into the present, touching other traditions like the tantric tradition, where that is extant, it's very tempting to look at this and say, you know, this is working here. Maybe I can import it into this context here. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it can be, what I like to say is that it inspires me to create something that works in this tradition. And then sometimes it doesn't. I mean, the thing that I miss the most in working with the Greek, with the Hellenistic deities is mantras. So all of the tantric deities have sounds. They are, you said, they are the yantra. It's not that the yantra represents you. They are embodied in the yantra, and they are embodied in the mantra.
And the mantra, yeah.
And it's just this very immediate visceral connection with that force. And then I don't have that necessarily with the Hellenistic deities. And I've messed with that for a while. I mean, Crowley did a lot of appropriation and appropriated the mantra Om, and it talked about bringing mantras in from other deities to represent other deities, and I avoid that practice. It is the deity, and I don't think that you can force something like that. So I go to using the name of the deity or using epithets and hope that it's something arises naturally. But that's an example for me of like there are things that are connectors. The deity, the statue work is very similar in Tantra and in Neoplatonic theurgy, but the sound work is really different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you know, we can maybe approximate getting sound in, and I've thought about this a lot as well, Brandy, because I have the same sort of like, oh, I wish we had mantra. I wish we had sound syllables that we could use. And, you know, as you know, my spirit beloved is Gwynap Neath, who is a Welsh deity. And so what I've found to be useful is starting to study the Welsh language. You know, even though we understand with language that it's morphed over the years, and what, you know, in like the Hellenic Greek, right, that Plato was speaking was probably not modern Greek, but we can find the words in those cultural languages, and that can become a kind of portal, especially if we're working in a lineage with a being that with a spirit that is really clearly associated with a tradition or a place.
Yeah. This is a marvelous conversation. I'm so glad to get a chance to just kind of sit down and tease some of this out that we've kind of glanced at over some of our other conversations, and get a chance to kind of dive deeply into it. And so we've talked some time. I want to make sure that you get a chance to say all of the things that you wanted to say. Were there other topics that you wanted to make sure to cover, something you want to tell people about?
That is a great question. I didn't have a set agenda, you know, Brandy, when you and I get together and talk, we just always have so many things that come up. I thought, you know, we'll just go wherever the spirit takes us, you know, pun intended. So
yeah.
I think that, you know, what I found really useful is this idea of creating space in our bodies for dancing with the divine in this internal alchemical place. And the best example that I have is in when I was really in deep sadhana, and I did nightly sadhana with my Shakta Kula for a number of years, and when I was like sort of at the height of that, there were rituals that I was invited to participate in where I sat as the Morti, as the deity.
Yeah.
And those were really quite revelatory to me, because it was something that like I said, I sort of knew what that would feel like and what I was doing because of all the years being a Pentecostal, which I had left, back in my teens. But I knew it was like to just sort of step back and let that, because I was a full on speaking in tongues, baptized in the Holy Spirit, Pentecostal. So I knew what it was like to step back and let that come forward. But when I was invited to sit as the Morti in a Tarpana, a water ritual, for Lakshmi, and Lakshmi is one of my Ishtadevi. And so when she sort of came up and out of me for this ritual, and just the beautiful way in which the ritual is constructed to facilitate that, and then to do this like questioning of like, wow, if Lakshmi is me and I'm Lakshmi, but I'm also Megan, what does that mean with how I need to show up in the world and what I'm doing in the world? And it was very humbling, right? And fortunately I had a fantastic therapist that I was working with, and she was like, Megan, I think after this ritual, which was a very initiatory experience for me, she's like, I think you just need to spend some time being Megan and like get really into just your mundane Megan personality, because I was really in this like, what does this mean to sort of be this and also this other thing? And it wasn't like I was having a split personality, right? Or in this kind of dissociated space. It was just this opening of the vista of more of a fullness of who I am, like getting to know thyself in this deeper way. And I really had to go through a process of learning how not only was that did not make me special, right? But one of the things I love about the tantric practice is that it's not just, I might be really adept at doing that because of my years of training, but everybody got to sit. If they agreed to, everybody got a chance to sit as the Morti and be worshipped as the Morti, as the deity. And that was just in my Kula, that was just what we did. We shared it. And I thought that was such a beautiful example of like, yes, this is, everyone has the capacity to do this, and everyone has this divine part of themselves that is really wanting to beautifully express through them. And really a lot of the work is just to the set and the setting and the auspicious circumstances that we construct for ourselves to allow that to happen. And the more we do that, the more we, I think, become, there's this concept in Tantra called Lakshana. And it's when the more that you are in that deep devotional relationship with the deity, the more you start to actually look like the deity, and people's physiognomy will actually change. And this is sort of known amongst different like gurus and holy people, which the way I think of gurus and holy people is they're the people that probably like are the yo-yo ma's of spiritual practice, right? Like we might all be able to pick up a cello and honk out or scratch out something, but not all of us have the capability to like really become a virtuoso. So that was a long what do I want to add when I said I didn't have anything else to add, but there we are.
Oh, it's lovely. And I love that story that you tell about what your Kula did. My Kula does something where we address each other as goddess. So we recognize the goddess in each other, but as ourselves. So I would say Megan Ma, and you would say Brandy Ma.
Mm-hmm.
And so it centers us in both being goddess and being in our specific selves. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I'd love to bring into pagan practice too, because it's so, it really centers me in the understanding of my own divinity, which I think is the goal of all of the magical practices.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the Church of All Worlds kind of was going for that when they were like, thou art God, thou art goddess, right? Yeah. And invoking that. In our Kula, we say Devi. So I'm Megan Devi and you'd be Brandy Devi.
I just love that. So I'm going we've talked almost an hour, so I want to respect all of our time. And I know that you've talked about the book that you're working on. You've got a class, and you have the work that you do with Cherry Hill Seminary. So do you have any classes coming up that people could think about connecting with?
Yeah. So I have a few different options. So through the Cherry Hill framework, there is a course I'm teaching this November called The Dark God, His Many Faces and Expressions, where I'm going to really explore this concept of dark God, right? And kind of demystify it, destigmatize it, and look at, and I take a very Jungian approach where it's this idea of what are these archetypes that we've created, and these ideas, and how have we sort of projected our unconscious onto these different ways in which we understand the different functionaries or faces of the dark god. It's a companion course to a course I taught there last year on the dark goddess. So we've got the dark goddess, and then this November, and that runs for 4 weeks, Tuesday nights for the month of November, and it's open to everyone, so you don't need to be enrolled in Cherry Hill to take that course. And then I have my ongoing group program, which people are more than welcome to come apply to. And then I do screen people, though, for, to make sure that they're going to play nice with the rest of the group, because we are a very tight-knit group. And then I have a study at home course, Spirit Marriage 101, which is a sort of companion to my book on spirit marriage. And the course really takes you into a ton of practices and teachings from the book, but also like hands-on practices and ways that you can apply it much more than I was able to go into in the book. And that's for, some people are visual learners, and some people need to listen, and other people kind of need to kinesthetic and do. So I'm trying to sort of cover all my learning style bases there with the Spirit Marriage one.
Great. So if people wanted to connect with any of those, where did they get that information? What websites do they go to?
Yeah, so the Cherry Hill course is on the cherryhillseminary.org website, and everything else is on drmeganrose.com.
Marvelous. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I've really been looking forward to this, and it's just marvelous to get a chance to go to this depth. I sincerely salute you, Megan Davey.
Thank you, Brandy Davey. Thank you, Hercules Deva.
Thank you. I hung on every word in this conversation. I resonated with a lot of it, as Brandy will tell you. My entire life is about entheosis, and the statue to put the spirit in is me. I used to exercise so that I become a vehicle or vessel for that physique. So I wanted so badly to jump in on the conversation at several points, but it just stressed we have to have another conversation after this. But thank you so very much for both of you. This was, I got a lot out of this.
Yeah. Well, and Hercules, that's like what I was saying is, at least in the tantric framework, you start with the deity that you put the spirit house in, but eventually, as you progress in your practice, you're putting the spirit house inside of yourself.
Yes. And and once you realize that you're one with the deity, you realize that so is everything else. So as you said, it's a humbling experience. It's not an ego trip. And then you become aware over time that you're the deity here doing this, and this way you and your deity and your every other deity. And
and it's beautiful because you see it in the tantric tradition where a particular deity like Kali has many different names and faces. There's Shmashana Kali and Dakshan Kali and Adya Kali, and there's all these different Kalis, right? And you can think about that as us, right? Like I might have a Ishta Devi that's Kali, but I'm Megan Kali,
Yes.
and then that's similar to, I think of like in the Kemetic tradition, a set or Isis of 10,000 names. So I think think that that's like this idea that there are multiplicities of iterations, right? Of fractals of, and I always like I started with saying, I like to think of the deity as this archetypal force, and not archetype as in not real, right, or not intelligent, but like this larger being that is comprised of these little constellation beings that came to express a particular flavor of that divine energy into this particular place in time in in our earth history.
And honoring the tradition in the cultural context in which it arose while universalizing it at the same time. That's been the mission of our theurgy conversations for over half a decade now. Honor the tradition, share the tradition, and acknowledge the roots from which this sprang up and spread, and at the same time not keep it confined to a certain cultural context.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that today. I was thinking about how, tradition, if it doesn't grow and change and adapt, becomes a straitjacket. And all of our contemporary world religions are not what they started as. They've grown, they've changed, they've migrated, they've been, for better or for worse, they've been infiltrated and sometimes incorporated. I mean, New Orleans voodoo is a great example of this, right? It came with the Middle Passage, and it landed in New Orleans, and then there was Catholicism there, and there was indigenous spiritual traditions there, and it kind of became this pastiche, or they call it a gumbo pot of different ways in which the spirits that they're working with, they recognize the origination in the Haitian voodoo, right? So there's this sort of correspondence that happens, but that it's also its own unique thing, and it has and those spirits that came with the Middle Passage, similar to the Virgin of Guadalupe story, they said, okay, you're going to worship me as this saint so that I survive, right, over and against these hegemonic forces. So
fortunately, I have to go. I wish this conversation could go on for 10 hours. Yes, they syncretized Hercules into St. Luke, and at some point there was graffiti in the back of a statue of Hercules lamenting the fact, but that's a conversation for another day.
Another day.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm honored by this conversation, and I have a lot to meditate on. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
And this should be up definitely by tomorrow.